Well, hello again. Thanks for joining me. Today is March 16th. It's the 9th week of the legislative session. So thanks for joining me again for this newsletter update. There's several things that I want to talk to you about today. Now, the first thing that I want to talk to you about is the virus. So I know that you've been hearing a lot of news about this. This is a pretty serious illness because it's new, because it's a new virus. The coronaviruses, as I know you've heard in the news, but just a reminder, the coronaviruses have been around. 20 to 30% of the common cold is caused by one of the coronaviruses. So you've no doubt had a coronavirus in the past, but this one is new, and that's why it's causing so much havoc. No one has resistance to it, nor do we have a way of treating it or preventing it. And remember that it's spread by droplets, in other words, coughing and sneezing. And that's why the recommendation of the 6-foot distance between other people. So that's why. And then the frequent hand washing as well. So washing your hands, avoiding touching your face, because it's by touching and then transmitting that to your face that the virus enters the body. So just some things to think about. Certainly it affects the elderly most seriously, also pregnant women, anyone with disabilities or coexisting health issues. Again, I know you've heard all of this, but just to remind you, remember that the symptoms generally are a fever, a cough, and difficulty breathing. So keep an eye on your temperature. If you do have any of those symptoms, call your healthcare provider. Tell them what you're experiencing. They know you, they know your health history, and they can then recommend the best course for you. Maybe it's to come in, but if they want you to come into the office, they want to be prepared for you coming so that the waiting room isn't full and things like that. So protecting yourself with social distancing, new term for us, right? Social distancing of 6 feet can be challenging, but it has been very effective. And of course, stay home if you are experiencing this illness. Now, you may have noticed that here in the legislature, we have restricted the building access now. So we are not allowing the general public in. We're not allowing lobbyists in. It is pretty much closed down so that just legislators, legislative staff, and the press who have press passes are allowed in the building. And this is not because anyone in the building is ill. It's because we want to keep the building healthy so that the legislature can continue the work to get the budgets done and make sure that the governor and his state medical officer and healthcare providers have the funding they need to address the illness. Make sure that the state labs and the private labs have what they need. One of the things I do want to emphasize is that we be careful not to panic. You know, that famous saying that FDR stated, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. That's kind of an overstatement, but the fact of the matter is the more panic, the more we see irrational actions. And we want this to be scientifically based. We want to do it with care and thought for long-term ramifications. We want to keep as many Alaskans healthy and free of this disease as possible. And so far, Alaskans have been kept healthy. The only case we've had was a person traveling into the state. Now, I remind you that today is March 16th, and this could change by the time you view this video. But nevertheless, those personal responsibility actions that you take are the best actions to protect yourself. So, things that we talked about happening in the legislature have changed a lot in the last week since we talked. So one of the things that's happened is we've had financial changes. And so I want to just briefly talk about those. So you remember we've been talking about the permanent fund. And when we talked earlier, actually a couple weeks ago, we talked about the fund having $67 billion in it. Well, then last week when we talked, I said, well, there have been some losses and it's actually down to 65. Well, today we've experienced yet more losses and we're down to about 63.5 in the permanent fund itself. Now, that 49 billion in the principal is still there. The losses are coming out of the earnings reserve account. And remember, we talked about this is all the permanent fund, but there are two segments to it. This principal is protected by the Constitution. The earnings reserve account accepts those earnings, and out of this, the legislature can appropriate, and we appropriate money for the dividend. So you see, we've experienced some losses. Those losses now bring this down to about 14.5 billion. This is where our losses are absorbed, is in the earnings reserve account. Now, at the end of June of this year, so what is that, 2-3 months away, this 14.5 is going to have 4 billion out of it removed and transferred up here. This is action that we took in the budget last year. So this number will drop to about 10 billion at the end of June. Not because of losses, but because we took 4 of it and we decided to protect it up here in the principal. So just to let you know, these numbers are changing frequently as the financial situation in the U.S. changes. So again, reviewing what we've talked about before, the fiscal year 21 budget. We've talked about a spending limit. I just wanted to emphasize to you, we have been cutting this budget, the state's budget, since the 2013 budget. And we're down now to approximately the same budget we had in about 2006. It's about half the budget that we had in 2013. So we have continuously put down pressure on spending. Now, remember that in this time period, right about 2015, we experienced a severe decrease in this price of a barrel of oil. And that drove some of the reduction in our budget because we simply didn't have any money. We do have a budget this year that includes a supplemental. We talked about this also in prior weeks, but just to refresh, we have a supplemental for the 2020 budget that's right now in place. The governor had believed he could make some significant cuts. And if those cuts were possible, I believe Governor Dunleavy would have achieved them. Unfortunately, they were not achievable for a couple reasons. First of all, these are some of the things that are in the supplemental. Medicaid, he had hoped to get a pretty significant cut in Medicaid, and it simply didn't happen. He was hoping to get 128 million reduction, could not get that from the federal government. We had forest fires, 110 million. We had an earthquake that requires about 3 million more. We have adult dental. The governor had hoped to be able to cut that program, found out that actually it creates more cost, so we're putting back in $8.3 million. There's a mobile radio system that needs about 24, and we have various judgments, settlements that need to be made for another almost 6 million. So at the end of the day, the supplemental is 299. We could round that to 300 million. Then we have the coronavirus that we were just talking about. The governor's asking for $4 million in state funds. That will bring in about $9 million in federal money. In addition, the federal government has pledged to us another, I believe it's 20 million, something in that range. Anyway, there's going to be some good funding for that. And then we have $1 million for the audit. Because of the votes and the timing that they occurred last year, some funds got moved around and accounting got pretty messed up. And so the cost of doing the state's audit this last year was actually $1 million. So the total supplemental comes to $304 million. This is on top of the approximately 4.4 or so billion that we had funded last year. So we're going to have to get this money you'll see here that we're going to be getting that extra $54 million that we need out of the Constitutional Budget Reserve. Again, we talked about this in the past. That's our savings account. So we ended last week talking about this budget that we're working on for next year, starts on July 1, and the problem that we have. So here's the budget proposed by the governor. Okay, $4.5 billion for education, healthcare, public safety, transportation, and $2 billion to distribute $3,000 dividend checks. So if we look at this budget proposed and the money that we have, the revenue that we have is about $5 billion. Okay, so that comes from our various taxes and the percent of market value, the money that comes out of the earnings reserve account. So you can see that this funds an awful lot of our budget. In fact, if we're just funding this blue part, we have enough, and we have $477 million in surplus. But when we're talking about a dividend of that size, we have a deficit of $1.5 billion. And you hear the governor talking about that. So we have that issue. And the governor has proposed an additional $815 million more for a second part dividend for last year. So that's where we ended last time. Let's talk about where we are today. A few minutes ago, we talked about the changing fiscal world situation. So I want to talk to you about oil. The budget was put together based on about $59 a barrel oil. But oil has dropped. Now, this morning, I wrote down $35 a barrel. Actually, moments ago, I saw that oil has dropped below $30 a barrel. But let's just go with what it was a few hours ago. At $35 a barrel, we are in a forecast of $40 a barrel. Even if we dropped our forecast from the 56 or so a barrel down to 40, we would have in this year a $300 million loss of revenue. For next year, we would be looking at $550 million less to spend. That's if oil gets up to $40 a barrel. And like I said, right now it's below 30. The permanent fund, we talked about that a few moments ago. It was $66.7 billion at the end of January 2020. You can find this number if you go to Alaska Permanent Fund Corporation, apfc.org, you'll see the balance of the permanent fund. At the end of this year, we actually expect that fund to be worth only $63.5 billion, and the earnings reserve will be down. It started out at 18.1. I told you that actually we're expecting it at the end of this year to be at about $10 billion. So while the price of oil falls, it also affects our permanent fund as the market falls, because the permanent fund is invested in various ways. Remember that the permanent fund dividend comes out of the earnings reserve account. That means it comes out of the permanent fund, the part that can be spent. I am linking in the newsletter the House Finance meeting from March 11th, 2020. In that meeting, we heard from the legislative finance director and one of the analysts who put forth modeling on various ideas for being able to still give a permanent fund dividend. And they pointed out that even if the permanent fund dividend were zero, we would have a deficit of nearly $200 million this year, and that's if the price of oil were $40 a barrel. So I'm linking this meeting in the newsletter. If you're interested, You'll be able to watch it. It's about, I think it's about an hour and a half or so, and you'll see the documents. You can pull those documents off yourself and look at them, and you can actually see the analysis, and you'll hear them discussed extensively by the House members. I wanted to also talk to you about where we go from here. Now, some folks believe that the only thing we need to do is change the tax on oil. So I wanted to give you a picture of what that looks like. So again, this morning, a few hours ago when I put this together, the price of oil was about $33 a barrel. So at $33 a barrel, there it is, an oil company that's developing our oil has to ship it down our pipeline and then put it on ships that will transport it to the West Coast, or we can actually transport our oil to Asia. We have an export ability, the only state in the union that does. That costs $9. So taking 33 minus 9, the gross value of that barrel of oil is $24 to the producer, right? The producer gets to then subtract their expenses. To pull a barrel of oil out of the ground on Prudhoe Bay, average cost is about $24. Wait a minute. It's worth $24 and it costs $24 to actually produce it? That's right. That means the value, the net, before any taxes occur to the producers is a big fat zero. Now, where do the taxes come in? Property taxes, $3 a barrel approximately. These are average. So now the producer is down. He's underwater, $3. But wait, he owes the state royalty. It doesn't matter that he's making zero profit. The producer owes us royalty, and approximate royalty on a barrel of oil is $3. Now the producer is down $6 a barrel for bringing up 1 barrel of oil. Then he has a production tax. Right now we're at 4%. That's the minimum. That's another $1. So now the producer is down $7. He's underwater $7 for producing a barrel of oil. The state and federal corporate income taxes obviously don't apply at this point. So they actually gain back about $2 there. So at the end of the day, at $33 a barrel, the producer's share of a barrel of oil is -5. -5. At the same time, over here, the state of Alaska is making $3, $1. We're coming out with $7 in tax and royalties from 1 barrel of oil, while the producer is underwater by $5. If oil were to go to $50 a barrel, we'd love that because we'd make even more. Look at that. We'd make $10 on each barrel of oil. The producer would take home $4. This is under our current tax structure. But the change that's being proposed in the tax initiative, at $50 a barrel, the state would bring home $12. The producer would get $2. So you can see here that it would actually be discouraging. We would be discouraging the production of our oil by changing our tax policy. It's discouraging enough now that at these low prices, the producer is losing $5 for every barrel, while the state is still bringing in $7 at every barrel of oil. If we were to change to the initiative, that would get even worse. So I wanted to make sure that you knew that. It's kind of important information that I thought you would want to have. I want to talk to you also about last week. We heard a lot of bills, the Pioneer Home. You're going to see that in the video today. We also heard a bill on mining, changing some of the mining rules about reporting work being done at mining sites. These are placer miners, small miners that the bill refers to. This coming week, the focus in the legislature, in the Senate, is going to be on the operating budget. That is the constitutional mandated function for the legislature, and that's what we'll be focused on. So thanks so much for joining us. Remember, social distancing of 6 feet, wash your hands frequently, and try not to touch your face, nose, eyes, mouth. and be safe out there. Thanks so much for watching.